The letter was still on the table when Vera left the solicitor's office. She hadn't taken it with her. There was no point. She had read it 3 times while sitting across from Mr. Hatch, watching him fold his hands and explain in that careful, practiced voice that the estate had passed entirely to her stepbrother, that the clause was valid, that her father had signed it, and that there was nothing done. To be done. She walked home in the rain. Not home. She didn't have one of those anymore. She walked back to the boarding house on Carver Street, where she had been staying for 11 days. And she sat on the edge of the narrow bed, and she thought about what her father's house looked like in November. The way the oaks went bare along the East Drive, the way the kitchen smelled in the mornings, the way her mother's portrait hung in the upstairs hall, slightly crooked, because her father had never let anyone straighten it after the hanger bent, and her mother wasn't there to care anymore. Vera Lennox was 24 years old. She had grown up at Ashford Park. She had never once imagined she would not be allowed inside it. Her stepbrother Denton had moved in 6 weeks after her father's funeral. His mother, the second Miss Lennox, a woman Vera had never been able to call anything but ma'am, had supervised the rearrangement of the furniture. Vera had been given 3 weeks to collect her things. She had taken her mother's letters, a small watercolor of the garden, and the ring her father had given her on her 16th birthday. She had left the portrait. She couldn't carry it, and she wasn't going to ask Denton for help. She had thought the solicitor would find something, an error in the filing, a clause her father hadn't understood. She had paid Mr. Hatch out of the last of her savings to look. He had found nothing. The position had been advertised in the Thursday paper. Vera had read it twice before she understood what she was looking at. Ashford Park, the estate of Lord Aldrich, seeking an experienced housekeeper's assistant. References required. Inquire by letter. She had stared at that for a long time. Ashford Park was her father's house. Lord Aldrich was what Denton was calling himself now, apparently, having inherited the courtesy title along with everything else. The position of housekeeper's assistant was, by any reasonable measure, beneath what Vera had been born to. She wrote the letter of inquiry that evening, using the name she had decided on carefully. Miss V. Marsh. Marsh had been her mother's maiden name. It felt like something borrowed rather than stolen. She had 3 references from families she'd helped during the past 2 months, small tasks, assisting with correspondence, organizing household accounts for a widow on the next street over. They were real references. She had earned them. She sent them along with the letter and waited. The response came in 5 days. She was to report to the rear entrance of Ashford Park on Monday at 8 in the morning. She was to ask for Mrs. Cavendish, the head housekeeper. Vera folded the letter and put it in her coat pocket and sat very still for a moment. Then she got up and started deciding what she could carry. The rear entrance was not a door she had used often. She had passed through it a handful of times as a child, following the cook once to see where the delivery wagons came. But she had not stood outside it waiting to be let in. She stood there now in the gray Monday morning with a traveling bag at her feet and her hair pinned tightly under her hat, and she waited. The woman who opened the door was short and square-shouldered, with the kind of face that had made its decisions about people and rarely revised them. She looked at Vera the way one looks at a letter that might contain bad news. "Miss Marsh?" "Yes, ma'am, Mrs. Cavendish." She stepped back to allow Vera inside. "You're punctual. That's a start." The kitchen was exactly as Vera remembered it, which was the first difficult thing. The copper pots hung in the same order. The long table where cook used to roll pastry was still pushed against the north wall. The smell was wood smoke and lye soap and something baking, and Vera had to concentrate very deliberately on keeping her face arranged into an expression of polite interest rather than the particular grief of a person walking through a place that has become someone else's. "Mrs. Cavendish walked her through the duties briskly. The position was largely administrative, managing the household inventory, recording expenses, assisting with correspondence, coordinating between departments. Vera had watched her father's housekeeper do exactly this work for 20 years from the other side of the table. "Lord Aldrich is in residence," Mrs. Cavendish said. "He entertains on occasion. You'll need to be unobtrusive when guests are present. The family does not interact with household staff directly, as a rule." Vera nodded. She knew this rule. She had lived by it from the other direction. "You'll have Sunday afternoons and one half-day on Wednesday. Your meals are here, in the kitchen. Your room is on the 3rd floor, east wing." Mrs. Cavendish paused. "Do you have questions?" "No, ma'am. Good." Mrs. Cavendish looked at her again, the same assessing look. "You have the manner of someone used to running a household, Miss Marsh, not assisting with one." Vera kept her expression neutral. "My previous employer was very organized. I tried to learn from her." Mrs. Cavendish made a sound that wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite skepticism, and led her upstairs. The room on the 3rd floor looked over the east garden. Vera stood at the window for a full minute after Mrs. Cavendish left, looking at the oak trees her father had planted before she was born. They were bare now, the way she had imagined them. She had been right about that. She unpacked her bag carefully. She hung her 2 plain dresses in the narrow wardrobe. She put her mother's letters in the drawer of the nightstand. She set the watercolor face down on the table. She wasn't ready to look at it yet. Then she went downstairs and began to learn how to be invisible in her own house. The inventory system was a disaster. Whoever had been keeping the records before Vera's arrival had done so with a creativity that bore no relationship to standard practice. Items were listed twice, or not at all. Expenses from October were filed under August. The wine cellar count hadn't been reconciled in 4 months. Vera spent her first 3 days simply understanding the existing records before she touched anything. She asked questions carefully, framing them as confusion rather than critique. She watched how Mrs. Cavendish moved through the house, which rooms she entered freely, which she knocked before entering, who she deferred to. Lord Aldrich, Denton, was present but largely absent in the way wealthy men managed to be. She heard his voice occasionally from rooms she had no reason to enter. She passed him once in the corridor near the library and kept her eyes forward and her pace unchanged, the way she had seen maids do it her whole life, and he walked past her without any sign of recognition whatsoever. That was the second difficult thing, and also, in some way she couldn't entirely explain, a relief. She had been afraid he would know her. He didn't. She had changed her hair. She wore it tightly back now, under a plain cap, and she had worn finer things as a girl, and she supposed that the distance between who you expected to see and who was actually in front of you was enough, sometimes, to make recognition impossible. She filed this information away and kept working. On the 4th day, she found the discrepancy. It was in the estate accounts. Not her responsibility, strictly speaking, but the household inventory overlapped with the estate ledgers in enough places that she had been cross-referencing them to catch errors. The discrepancy was small at first. A figure that didn't match between 2 records, a transfer she couldn't trace. She noted it and moved on, and 2 days later found another one, and then another. By the end of her 2nd week, she had a very clear picture of what was happening to the Ashford Park accounts, and it had nothing to do with accounting errors. She sat at the small desk in her room that evening, looking at the notes she'd made, and thought about what her father would have said. Her father had trusted Denton's mother. He had married her, late in life, when grief had worn him down in ways he hadn't recognized. He had signed documents he'd been told were routine. Vera had watched it happen and not understood what she was watching until it was too late. She thought, he's doing it again, not to a person this time, to the land itself. She thought about Mr. Hatch, who had found nothing wrong with the will. She thought about the fact that she was sitting in her father's house, in a servant's room, with evidence that the estate was being systematically drained. She put the notes in the drawer with her mother's letters. Then she went to bed and lay awake for a long time thinking about what to do with what she knew. The dinner party was announced on a Wednesday. Lord Aldrich was hosting 12 guests that Saturday, a mix of county families and London visitors. Mrs. Cavendish distributed duties with the efficiency of a general planning a campaign. Vera was assigned to manage the seating correspondence and coordinate with the cook on the menu cards. She was in the small parlor off the entrance hall on Friday morning, arranging the place cards when she heard voices in the corridor. "Stool. Vidya, didn't realize you'd be bringing Hartwell," said Denton's voice, closer than she'd expected. He asked to come along. A voice she didn't know. Male, careful in its phrasing. "I hope that isn't inconvenient." "Of course not." A pause. "Hartwell hasn't been to Ashford before, has he? Not that I know of." The voices moved away toward the drawing room. Vera set down the place card she was holding and picked up the next one, and did not think about the name she had just heard. Hartwell. Lord Hartwell. She knew the name. Everyone in the county knew the name. He was the sort of man about whom things were said at dinner tables. That he had rebuilt his family's estate from genuine ruin, that he was methodical in everything, that he did not invest carelessly or speak carelessly, or make acquaintances carelessly. He was also, as far as Vera was aware, the sort of man who sat on exactly the kind of county committee that oversaw land disputes and estate irregularities. She finished the place cards and went to find Mrs. Cavendish. Saturday evening arrived with the particular formality of a house, trying to remember what it was supposed to be. Vera spent the first 2 hours of the dinner party in the corridor between the kitchen and the dining room, coordinating the course with the footmen. She was not supposed to be visible to the guests. She was very good at not being visible. She had learned this, in reverse, as a girl. She had walked through rooms full of her father's guests without noticing the people who made those rooms run. And she was ashamed of that now, in a specific and useful way. She saw Lord Hartwell twice before she understood she was looking at him. The first time was in the hallway near the stairs, where he had stepped away from the drawing room. He was talking to no one, looking at something on the wall. She realized, with a small shock, that he was looking at her mother's portrait, which still hung there, still slightly crooked, which Mrs. Cavendish had apparently never thought to straighten. He was not admiring it in the performative way guests sometimes did. He was simply looking at it the way someone looks at a thing they find genuinely worth looking at. Vera moved past him with her eyes forward, the way she had learned to do, and went back to the kitchen. The second time was more complicated. She was crossing the back corridor with a list of wine selections when she rounded a corner and nearly walked directly into him. She stepped back. He stepped to the side. There was a brief and slightly undignified pause in which both of them recalculated their trajectories. "My apologies," he said. "Not at all, my lord." She kept her eyes appropriately deferential and moved to continue past him. "You know the house well," he said. She stopped. The statement was mild. There was no particular emphasis on it. She turned back carefully. "I've been here several weeks, my lord. It's a large house. Several weeks isn't usually long enough to move through it the way you do." He was looking at her with the kind of attention that was not intrusive but was absolutely precise. "Most new staff take months to learn the back routes." "I'm a quick study," Vera said. There was a pause. "Lord Aldrich was telling me the previous inventory system was quite disorganized," Lord Hartwell said. "He seemed pleased that it had been sorted out." "I imagine so. Did you find anything unusual when you were sorting it?" The question landed quietly, the way a stone lands in still water. Vera looked at him. She had spent 2 weeks thinking about what to do with what she knew. She had not, in any of that thinking, imagined this particular moment, standing in a back corridor holding a wine list, being asked a careful question by a man she had heard about and never met. "I found several things I'd consider worth a second look," she said. "Whether they're unusual depends on how the accounts have been run in recent years." Lord Hartwell was quiet for a moment. Then, "I see." He looked at her the same way he had looked at her mother's portrait. "Like something worth the attention?" he asked. "Miss Marsh, my lord." A pause. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite recognition, but something adjacent to it. Something uncertain. "Marsh," he repeated. "Yes, my lord." She held his gaze for exactly 1 second longer than a housekeeper's assistant probably should have. Then she dropped her eyes, excused herself, and continued down the corridor. She did not look back. She found the note under her door on Sunday morning. It was written on estate stationery. Not Denton's paper, which she knew, but a heavier stock she didn't recognize. The handwriting was clear and even, the kind that meant someone had been taught to write and had then decided to mean it. "Miss Marsh, if you are willing to speak more fully about what you found in the accounts, I would appreciate the opportunity. I will be in the library at 10 o'clock. You are under no obligation." Vera read it twice. Then she got dressed, pinned her hair, and went to the library at 10 o'clock. Lord Hartwell was standing at the window when she arrived. The library looked the same as it had her whole life. The same shelves, the same worn leather chairs, the same smell of old paper and dust, and something that was purely and specifically her father's house. She had spent half her childhood in this room. She had learned to read here. She had sat in the chair by the fire. On the evening, her father told her about her mother's illness, and she had cried there, and he had sat next to her, and not said anything useful, but had stayed. She crossed the room and stood at a reasonable distance and waited. Lord Hartwell turned from the window. He looked at her, and this time she had the clear sense that he was not looking at a housekeeper's assistant. "I spoke to a friend of mine this morning," he said. "A solicitor. I asked him about the Ashford Park estate transfer, the legal history of it." Vera said nothing. "He mentioned that the late Mr. Lennox had a daughter," Lord Hartwell said, "from his first marriage, that she had contested the estate transfer but found no legal grounds, that her name was Vera." He paused. He also mentioned her mother's maiden name. The room was very quiet. "Marsh," Vera said. "Yes." She had spent 2 weeks thinking about this moment, too, in the abstract, what she would do when someone figured it out. She had decided she would be direct, because she had been indirect for long enough. "I came back for the records," she said, "not for the house. I don't know if I can get the house back, but there are things happening to this estate that my father would not have permitted, and I couldn't prove them from the outside. I needed to be inside, and now you can prove them? I have 2 weeks of notes. I'd need someone with standing to bring them forward." She looked at him steadily. "I can't do it myself. Miss V. Marsh has no standing. And Vera Lennox, apparently, has none either." Lord Hartwell was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, the oaks were bare along the east drive. "What you found," he said. "How significant is it?" "Significant enough that the estate will be materially damaged within 5 years if nothing changes. Possibly 3, and you documented this, carefully." He looked at her, then he looked at the room around her, the shelves, the window, the worn leather chairs. She wondered what he saw. "This was your father's library," he said. It wasn't a question. She answered it anyway. "Yes." "You grew up here?" "Yes." He was quiet for long enough that Vera began to calculate her options. Whether to leave, whether to press, whether she had miscalculated this entirely. She had taken a significant risk coming to this room. She had taken a significant risk the moment she wrote that letter of inquiry. "I'm on the County Land Commission," Lord Hartwell said finally. "There's a process for irregularities of this kind. It's not fast and it's not guaranteed and it requires documentation. I have documentation. I know. He turned back to face her. I would like to see it. She had not let herself feel anything much for the past 2 weeks. Feeling things was not useful when you were trying to be invisible. But standing in her father's library, hearing those words, something shifted in her chest. Not quite relief, not yet, but the particular sensation of a door opening in a wall you had stopped expecting to move. I'll get the notes, she said. The commission meeting was 6 weeks later. Vera did not attend it. She had no standing to attend it. She sat in the small room on the 3rd floor, looking out at the east garden, and she waited. Lord Hartwell had told her what he could without compromising the process. He had told her the documentation was sufficient. He had told her that 2 other members of the commission had seen enough to act. He had told her carefully that there were aspects of the estate transfer itself that warranted re-examination in light of what the accounts showed, that the original will had been signed under circumstances that merited scrutiny. He had not told her what the outcome would be. He was not a man who made promises he couldn't keep. She had come to understand that about him in the 6 weeks since the library. They had spoken 9 times, always in relatively appropriate contexts. She was aware of the position she occupied, and so was he, and neither of them had been careless about it. But in 9 conversations, she had come thought about careful things. She had come to know what he said. She had watched him read her notes with the focused attention of someone who took evidence seriously. She had answered his questions, and he had listened to the answers, actually listened, the way so few people did. She thought about that now, sitting at the window. The oaks were still bare. It would be another month before anything changed in the garden. The knock at her door came at 4 in the afternoon. It was Mrs. Cavendish. Her face, which had made its decisions about people, looked like it was in the process of revising one. Miss Marsh, she said, Lord Hartwell would like to speak with you. He's in the drawing room. Vera stood. She straightened her dress. She took her notes from the drawer, habit, or something like protection, and then put them back because she didn't need them anymore. She went downstairs. The drawing room was one Vera had grown up in. She knew every piece of furniture in it. She knew the pattern in the rug near the east window that looked like a bird if you tilted your head. She knew the faint water stain on the ceiling from a leak that had been repaired the year she was 10. Lord Hartwell was standing by the fireplace. He was not dressed as he had been at the dinner party. He had clearly come directly from somewhere, and he looked like a man who had been in a room having a serious conversation for several hours. His expression was difficult to read, but she had learned, over 9 conversations, how to try. The commission met this morning, he said. Yes. She stayed near the door. It felt important to stay near the door. The accounts you documented showed a pattern consistent with misappropriation. The commission has formally requested an independent audit. He paused. They've also referred the original estate transfer to a legal review panel, based on evidence that the signing circumstances were irregular. Vera's hands were very still. How irregular? She asked. Irregular enough that the review panel will be looking at whether the transfer itself should stand. The room was very quiet. That could take time, she said. It will take time. Yes, and in the meantime, Lord Aldrich has been informed that he is not to make significant estate decisions pending the audit. Lord Hartwell watched her, which means, effectively, that the bleeding stops. She let out a breath she had been holding, it felt like, for 3 months. You should know, Lord Hartwell said, that the review panel's process is not a guarantee. A successful outcome is probable, based on what I've seen. But probable is not certain. I understand probable. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Miss Marsh, yes, what's your name? He said it the same way he'd said it in the corridor on the night of the dinner party. But this time, there was something different underneath it. She met his eyes. "Vera," she said. "Vera Lennox." The portrait of her mother was still in the hallway, still slightly crooked. She hadn't straightened it because it hadn't been hers to straighten. But it was hers, she thought. It had always been hers. Lord Hartwell looked at her for a moment. Then, very deliberately, he crossed the room and offered her his hand. Not as one offers a hand to a housekeeper's assistant, as one offers a hand to a person who has been through a difficult thing and is still standing. She took it. Outside, the oak trees her father had planted were bare against the November sky, and the east garden waited, the way gardens do, for the season to turn.